At the outset, I'd like to acknowledge some special guests. We have some diplomats, other than the diplomats on stage, we have some diplomats visiting tonight, including from the Kuwaiti consulate. I'd like to acknowledge our board members. Tom McLean is chairman of Asia Society Southern California, and Mike Margolis is around here. He's also a member. He's on the executive committee, and he flew in from Shanghai, where he is now kind of commuting between Shanghai and LA. So we're very committed to organizing high quality and timely events, and we appreciate the support of the board and of all of you. Thank you for supporting our mission. So with that, I want to add that you'll see on your sheets that we have another interesting program coming up in February. On February 10th, the former Prime Minister of Australia, Kevin Rudd, is going to be speaking in Los Angeles. He is now the president of the Asia Society Policy Institute, which is a new outfit that's kind of like a think, do tank. It's, you know, it does do its own research, but it also, we convene policy minds. So he'll be here, and he's going to be speaking on Asia, the U.S. and global order in 2017, or as we're also calling it, the year of living dangerously. And that's not a criticism. Asia Society is a nonpartisan, non-government group, but I think, you know, you'll agree that rarely in your lifetime has a presidential election raised so many questions about America's course. And I think The Economist, which has a typically cheeky cover this week, Trump in looking like George Washington and wearing a pin saying, "I'll be tremendous." The start of their lead art, their cover story, I think summed it up very well. They quoted a British scholar saying, "Much of the time politics matters little to most people, then suddenly it matters all too much. Donald Trump's term as America's 45th president stands to be one of those times." And lest anyone doubt the importance of Asia on his agenda, you will probably know that one of his first acts today was signing an executive order to pull the United States out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement. It was something he promised on the campaign, and he made it official today. Of course, it hadn't been ratified, but it's now officially dead from the government's point of view. And he rattled so many cages during the campaign globally, during the campaign and during the transition, but of course, as of Friday, he's in power, he's real, and that makes the issues that we're going to discuss tonight all the more real, relevant, and timely. So it gives me great pleasure to have such a wonderful two panels. We're going to have two panels tonight, first on foreign affairs, then on Asian American issues, and you'll have a chance to ask questions of both panels afterwards. We'll have microphones going around. And if I could ask you to turn your ringers off, but keep your phones on, and feel free to tweet live. Our handle is @Asia Society LA. We appreciate it. We're also videotaping it, and we'll have excerpts on our site. Anyway, so I'd like to introduce the first panel. I'm going to introduce David Huebner, who's the moderator. He served for much of the Obama administration as ambassador to New Zealand and Samoa, and he's an international arbitrator who's lived and worked in various places around the world, including Shanghai and Tokyo. He's received numerous honors for his work as ambassador, including very recently, toward the end of the Obama administration, the Navy's Distinguished Public Service Award for his security and humanitarian efforts. So with that, I would like to welcome him to introduce the rest of the panels and the rest of the speakers, and please enjoy.
Thank you, Jonathan, for the gracious and brief introduction, always the best kind. And thank you all for coming out despite the deluge, which I'm hoping is over at least for a while. We certainly have a hot topic for discussion tonight with important and potentially disruptive news developing in real time, often hour by hour, almost all of which will impact not just what occurs within the borders of the United States, but most places, if not everywhere else on Earth. So buckle your seatbelts. We've assembled this evening a very interesting, accomplished panel to share their thoughts about the choppy, uncharted waters that may lie ahead. What I'd like to do is briefly introduce our four panelists, and then we've agreed that the best program for you is interactive rather than a series of long presentations. So each panelist will be invited to make a few opening remarks, then we'll have a little discussion on the panel, and then we'll throw it open so that at least around half of our time is Q&A with the audience. So I'd like to introduce, and I'll go from your left to right, His Excellency Kantathi Suphamongkhon, former trade representative and then foreign minister of Thailand. He is now senior fellow at the Berkel Center for International Relations, the Regents Professor at UCLA, where he teaches diplomacy and international relations, and a member of the Global Council of the Asia Society. Next in line is His Excellency Venkatesan Ashok, previously India's ambassador to Zimbabwe and the Czech Republic, and currently Consul General and a very frequent traveler as Consul General. He's all over YouTube. I was impressed when I Googled you. In San Francisco. He has held diplomatic assignments in Hong Kong, Malaysia, China, Austria, and Sri Lanka. So he brings a very diverse set of perspectives and experiences to us tonight. Next in line, David Loevinger, previously the U.S. Treasury Department senior official responsible for Asia policy, its representative in China, and a veteran of 3 presidential transitions. He is now Asia strategist for TCW, which has more than $9 billion invested in emerging markets. And finally, last but not least, Robert C. O'Brien, a partner in the law firm Larson O'Brien LLP with an international practice. He is a former U.S. representative to the UN General Assembly and recently published a book titled While America Slept, Restoring American Leadership to a World in Crisis. With that, I will turn the mic over to Robert, and then we'll just move down the line until it comes back to me for Q&A. And you should feel free to speak from your chair or hear whatever's comfortable.
The chair is fine. Thank you, Ambassador and Excellencies. It's a pleasure to be here on the panel with you. I think we're moving into a very interesting era of U.S., and I hate to use the word Asian, but U.S. Pacific or U.S. Asian politics. And let me just make 3 quick observations. Number one, we're going to see a return to American hard power. President Trump made it very clear during the campaign that he was going to increase the size of the Navy to 355 ships. That was something that was recommended by the Bipartisan Quadrennial Review Panel. It was something that President Obama did not do, and defense sequestration made that impossible. We know as of yesterday, defense sequestration is over. Unilateral disarmament on the U.S. side is over, and President Trump intends to have a lot of those ships, those holes in the water before the end of his first term. It'll be a high-low mix, and that's going to allow our more sophisticated and larger surface combatants to pivot to Asia, and you're going to see a much more robust Pacific fleet. The president's made it very clear that he's going to move to 1,200 frontline combat fighter jets, so you're going to see an increased Air Force presence in the Pacific, in Darwin, in Guam, certainly in San Diego here in California, in Hawaii, and also in Japan. This president is intent on carrying a big stick. I don't think we're going to have the harassment of U.S. Naval Service vessels like the Impeccable. I don't think the PRC is going to risk a confrontation with a robust U.S. Navy by stealing submarine drones or attempting to cut across the bow of our cruisers like they did with cowpens a few years back. So I think there's going to be a hard power aspect to our policy in Asia. I think we're seeing a return to geopolitics and trade, and they're interrelated. You've seen already the president, when he was president-elect, was certainly willing to reach out and to talk with President Xi in Taiwan. Taiwan is back in play as a potential American ally. I think you're going to see very close relations with the Anglosphere, with New Zealand, Australia, Canada. 4 of the 5 Anglosphere countries are Pacific countries, the Five Eyes countries. You're also going to see Britain playing in Asia more than it has since it decided to pull back from east of the Suez. As many of you know, the Brits are building 2 aircraft carriers, the Queen Elizabeth-class carriers, and senior British officials have said recently that they expect to see the Queen Elizabeth, which I think gets commissioned in 2018. It'll have its full complement of the air wing by 2020, that the Queen Elizabeth will be spending time in Asia. There's a reason for that. Of course, the UK, as Brexit becomes a reality, is going to be looking for new trading partners. Those partners will primarily be where the money is. It's kind of like, where do you go to rob the bank? Yeah, why do you rob the banks? It's because that's where the money is. England and the UK will be entering into free trade agreements, I would expect, with New Zealand, Australia. Singapore has announced this week that they want an FTA with the UK. South Korea and Japan have also indicated a willingness to enter into a free trade agreement with the UK. So as the UK pivots a little bit on an economic level from Europe, it will become more involved in Asia, both as a trading partner, as a military partner. The final point on the geopolitics, there is going to be, it appears to be a rapprochement or détente, whatever you want to call it, with Russia, with the Russian Federation. To the extent that the Trump administration views radical Islamic extremism and terrorism as an existential threat, and to the extent it views, as I believe it does, China as America's primary adversary, both from a trade and potentially from a military prospect, I think it makes sense to the folks in the Trump administration to attempt to resolve issues and to have a better relationship with Russia so that it can focus on the Middle East, ISIS, potentially Iran, and certainly on the Pacific with respect to China. So that's kind of the geopolitics of it, the way I believe the administration views things. Last point is personnel. Personnel can be policy. And one of the most interesting picks in the administration was making Peter Navarro from UCI here locally the trade czar, the assistant to the president for trade. He's going to have a broad-ranging portfolio. His views are very clear. His last book was called Crouching Tiger, and his, I believe, his video series was Death by China. And so Navarro was pulling people in around him that I think share those views and are going to be, that feel that the United States has policy towards China has been run by what we used to call in the State Department the panda huggers, as opposed to the panda hawks. So that, I think those are some of the things to keep an eye on as the administration gets up and running. But I think it's going to be a return to a much more vigorous American policy in Asia, especially as it relates to the PRC.
Thank you, Robert. Dave?
Thanks, David.
Thank you, David. And I want to thank the Asia Society for holding this event as a very important time. Unless you're talking about the weather, I'm not sure this deluge is going to end anytime soon. But as you mentioned, I had the honor of working for 4 different presidents, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. That meant I went through 3 transitions. And for those 3 transitions, what I saw were presidents that ran very tough on China during the campaign, and then learned a lot of lessons when they came to office. Maybe Trump will be different, but here's what I think won't change. One is President Trump, like his predecessors, is going to understand that the U.S.-China relationship is a very big and complicated one. We're adversaries in some areas. We cooperate in other areas. And our relationship 10, 15, and 20 years out is not fully defined. That future relationship, 20 years from now, depends on what we do today. And we can send it down a good trajectory or a bad trajectory. 2, presidents learn that guess what? Countries are constrained by domestic politics, not only in the United States, but everywhere else. And surprise, surprise, nationalism and populism are irresistible, as much irresistible politics in China as they are in the US. If you want to change Chinese policy, you have to change the political constraints that Chinese leaders operate under. This year is a political year in China. Chinese leaders are going to be tripping over themselves to be seen standing up to belligerent foreigners. In some ways, the Trump presidency is a gift for every nationalistic, every populist Chinese official that's going to try and move up the party hierarchy this year. Third, what presidents learn is domestic politics are complicated here. There's a widespread consensus that we need to get tough on China. And what I saw over working on China policy for almost 15 years is every industry wants us to get tough in China, but they want to make sure that whoever gets hurt, that it's not their interests, it's somebody else that gets hurt. So if you're going to raise trade barriers, don't do it in a way that hurts me, hurt the other guy behind the tree. China will surely retaliate. Politically, they have to, and economically, it makes perfect sense for them to signal that whatever the Trump administration does, they will meet it tit for tat. That's going to hurt U.S. interests. Those interests are going to contact congressional leaders, and the challenge of trying to change China was to come up with policy tools that were effective in changing policy the way you wanted it to change in China, and ended up without hurting us more than it hurt them. And that is not an easy thing to do. I agree with Robert that often presidents, when faced with that political constraint, ended up complaining a lot publicly and doing very little. It's kind of the opposite of the Teddy Roosevelt foreign policy strategy. I'm a little less optimistic with the new administration. I think there's a lot of uncertainty, and we'll see where it goes. But there seems to be a lot of bluster and a lot less uncertainty, kind of what the underlying policies are. Why don't I stop there?
Thank you, David. Excellency?
Thank you, David. I think I would like to begin by mentioning that the US-India relationship over the last 10 years or so has seen a very high trajectory. It's a trajectory which certainly has not been as high in the 34 years that I've been in the diplomatic service, and perhaps since independence. And that trajectory we see as being more or less sustained under the Trump administration. The reason is that there are sufficient geopolitical and economic reasons for sustaining this relationship. Both our countries have begun to engage in military cooperation, in military exercises of the Army, Navy, and Air Force. We have cooperation in homeland security, customs, border security, counterterrorism. You name it, across the spectrum, we have a very deep relationship now. And that is as far as the political and geopolitical and military aspects are concerned. On economics and trade and investment, there was a commitment by the Obama presidency and Prime Minister Modi to take trade from the present level of 100 billion plus to about 500 billion in the next few years. And I don't see that also changing in any significant way. At least aspirationally speaking, both sides would remain committed to that. And there is a broad bipartisan understanding in Congress, in the Senate, that a relationship with India is a worthwhile thing for both the countries. So therefore, I feel that that to an extent will also sustain. We have a very deep economic and trade and investment relationship. Indian companies are investing in the United States and US companies in a very big way in India. We also have more than 1 million students in the United States, and every year we have about 100,000 new students getting into US universities, which represents about $5 billion worth of income to the US. There is also a very deep relationship in other spheres. Defense cooperation, defense manufacturing has gone up in a big way with 49% foreign direct investment in defense manufacturing. And we have become surprisingly the largest purchasers of defense hardware from the United States. With all this, there is also a very strong linkage in science and technology, in medicine, in cancer research, in diabetes, in astronomy, cosmology, in monsoon research in the Indian Ocean. I can't think of any field of operation where we are not engaging in scientific and technological research. With all that having been said, and as it were the positive end of the stick, we are certainly watching to see how events develop with regard to two aspects. One is the impact that it will have on Indian companies which are investing and have invested in the United States, and on companies in the United States which employ Indians in a large way, especially technology companies. This is because the position put forward of having to have a minimum salary of $100,000 and second degree in order to qualify for the H-1B is likely to impact significantly Indian companies which are operating in the United States, which have invested and are operating in the United States, and also US companies which employ Indians in a big way. We'll have to see how this plays out as time goes on, but this is something which certainly is a matter of concern to many Indians and in many Indian companies, as also a lot of people who are engaged in working here. But all in all, I feel that the thrust is extremely positive, and we look forward to hopefully a very good working relationship.
Thank you, Ambassador Ashok. Excellency.
Thank you very much, and it's very good to be here at the Asia Society. And one thing I feel certain about is that Trump will bring in a lot of uncertainties. And at this point, I would share with you that I feel uncomfortable about probably two things come to mind. One is the introduction of the new concept, at least new to me, of alternative facts. The second one is the implementation of diplomacy by ways of Twitters, without sufficient information on elements being addressed on Twitters. Thailand and the US will enjoy the 184th year anniversary of our relations. Thailand, in Southeast Asia, Thailand is one of two countries that would be considered a US ally. We had some turbulent times with, at least in the past 4 years, but I think that the government in Thailand is eager to work with the Trump administration, looking at mutual interests rather than the imposition of US values. Going a bit broader, the TPP situation. As you know, TPP more or less died a while ago, but today it was a little showcase in which the US pulls out, although the TPP would not have been alive without US ratification. TPP, more or less the demise of TPP is actually good for Thailand, and it's good for China. It's actually distancing the U.S. from the Pacific Rim countries. We can elaborate later, but to go on a bit more, I was recently in China, and it was when the Taiwan president called Trump, the president-elect, and it's interesting that the Chinese reacted in a mild way, confused way. In fact, they shared with us that they just didn't know whether to be angry or whether to take it easy. They were confused, but they decided to take the other path, the calm path, and blaming the Taiwanese on the call, and also saying that we don't react to president-elects, we only react to president. But now he is the president. And I think I agree, the Chinese will, first of all, explore and see how far they can go, testing. But one China policy is very important to China. And on the note that Robert started, I think hard U.S. Military action is probably something that we have to look for. Even today, the U.S. declared that if the Chinese would do anything to any of the islands in the South China Sea, the U.S. would use force in return. So that's something to look at. One China policy is going to be a big one. The other one would be the currency situation. I was there at the Bank of China. And they said, well, Trump had threatened to declare that China is a manipulator, currency manipulator. And the message there was that I think Trump had it wrong. We are intervening, we are manipulating now to stop the currency from depreciation. And if he insists that if he denounces us, we might stop doing that and let the currency go on a free fall. So with that in mind, I feel that we have a lot of things to look at, the personalities. One thing that I wonder in closing is whether or not the office of the presidency will change Trump in a degree of molding him to a degree, whether he will listen to his cabinets. During the confirmation hearings last week, we noticed that some cabinet members were brave enough to go against some of his ideas. So let's see. Well, he's here to stay for 4 years, so let's hope for the best. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Excellency. Now, before we open the floor to questions from the audience, it may make sense to flesh out a couple of the issues that our panelists raised. I'm particularly interested in the exchange we've had of views on Robert's comment that Taiwan is back in play as an ally in this administration and what that might mean in the larger region. So, other thoughts from the panel on that issue? Just jump in. No need to be polite.
Well, I think, I'm more of a trade expert than a foreign policy expert, but my sense is that the one China policy was a delicate dance that had been crafted over 4 decades, the numerous administrations, and allowed the U.S. to develop economic relations with Taiwan, allowed Taiwan to develop economic relations with the world and with China, and avoid military conflict. And I think it is a reasonable question to say, are there things we can do to be more supportive of Taiwan in international diplomacy to help them play a bigger role in international organizations like the World Health Organizations. It's a very different thing to say, let's reopen the one China policy to see if I can get a better deal on corn exports. And I happened to be in Taiwan on the day the call was made, and on the day the headlines hit the newspapers. And my impression was the reaction in Taiwan was very mixed. Some people thought it was a very good thing. Other people were a bit concerned that if a 4-decade, irrespective of all the spin that happened, like, oh, this is no big deal, it was a big deal. And if 4 decades of U.S. policy could be thrown open so quickly, I guess it goes back, I think, to the question that you raised about how reliable an ally is the U.S. in Asia. Okay.
Yes, just wanted to follow that up. I think definitely the pulling out of the TPP will emphasize that the importance of that question. When so many countries have negotiated with the U.S. to the degree that signatures have been placed and then pulling out, does it mean that other negotiations will go that way too? So reliability is a problem. The other thing that came to mind about one China policy, well, first of all, it seems that President Trump looks at international relations as the bottom line is it's like a spreadsheet spreadsheet interest. And international relations and diplomacy is much more than that. There are many intangible things that would benefit the U.S. So if you just look at the spreadsheet, you might be in trouble. China doesn't do that. I mean, China spends a lot of money with not much in return in developing, sending money to Africa, sending money elsewhere. They have a bigger view. So that's one thing. But the one thing that is quite interesting about the call was that after the call, I understand that the president of Taiwan kind of hinted that she had a trip to Latin America early January, and maybe she would like to visit President-elect Trump in New York. She did come to New York, but there was no meeting. So maybe he learned something from that. Okay. Robert?
Yeah, look, I think what you have to understand about the situation in Taiwan, I spent a fair amount of time there this summer on business. Taiwan is a fully formed democracy at this point. The people of Taiwan have zero interest in one China. That's the reality. There is not going to, they've watched what's happened in Hong Kong and the deprivation of liberties, the retraction of promises, the diminution of democracy, the kidnapping of booksellers. There's zero interest in Taiwan for some sort of Anschluss. And yet, the failure of the United States and of the West to stand behind Taiwan and to make it very clear to the Chinese that there's always this threat with the Chinese that if you don't do exactly what we say, we're going to invade Taiwan. That's unacceptable. It's unacceptable for a member state of the United Nations to change borders by force. That's just something we don't believe in. And we know that American weakness is provocative, and we know where appeasement leads to. And so we have to be very clear with our friends in the PRC that the days of the OPM hack of stealing all of our data for everyone who's ever had a security clearance, that the days of ripping off Lockheed and Northrop and Raytheon to get the F-22 and F-35 plans and build their own planes, that the days of harassing American naval ships in international waters like they did with the impeccable Victorious and others, the days of forcing down one of our planes into Hainan and then disassembling it after they stole all the technology, that those days are over. The days of buying up American movie studios but then only allowing 25 films a year to come into China, those days are over. The days of coming here and buying freely U.S. companies and profiting from them, and yet requiring U.S. companies to, invest in these crazy joint ventures in the PRC, and as soon as they're successful, they get the Americans get given an offer they can't refuse to sell out to their Chinese partners, state-owned enterprises among them. That relationship, which has allowed China to get very rich very quickly, to move all these people into the middle class very quickly, that sort of one-sided relationship, whether it's in international politics, whether it's in claiming vast swaths of the Pacific as their own, whether it's threatening Taiwan, or whether it's unfair business practices, those days are over. And I think that the inaugural speech, which many here were upset about and called it dark and that sort of thing, I think that sent a very strong message. And I think President Trump is going to be a different president than we have seen in the past. And I don't think that he's going to move off these positions the way other presidents who've campaigned again, and raised China during the campaign have done it. Now, look, the Chinese have an opportunity here. China wants to be part of the civilized world. They want to be part, President Xi, which was quite surprising, went to Davos and gave a speech at Davos, which used to be all about human rights and rule of law and all that sort of thing, went to Davos and gave a speech on globalism. So if the Chinese want to be involved in that, it has to go both ways. It can't just be you have to keep giving, and letting us take, and that will keep us peaceful and we'll have this peaceful rise. And look, the Indians have felt the issue, and it's one of the reasons why this growing relationship that the ambassador talked about between India and America is potentially the most important geopolitical relationship in the world in the 21st century. China has pushed the Indians around. And they may come and cause with like the worst actors, with North Korea and with Pakistan. They have border disputes and are belligerent on the border. They've been very belligerent on the Indian border. And there's a reason why the United States is working with India so that its aircraft carrier can get cats and traps so that they can launch, naval aviation, in a faster, better way than they have in the past. So, look, there's certainly room for a very strong, good relationship between China and the United States, but the type of one-sided relationship that we've had with China and that much of the West has had with China over the past 20, 30 years, I think those days are coming to an end now.
Robert, thank you. Let's explore a general issue briefly, then we'll throw it open. And it's keying off a comment the foreign minister made about alternate facts. So we'll go from a very specific issue to a much more amorphous issue, which is there does seem to be, among the inner circle in the White House, a sense that if verifiable facts aren't appropriate, then articulating alternate facts may be helpful. There is also, if one looks at the president's business career, a distinct focus on deal breaking as an ongoing tactic in deal making. Those two factors would seem to be a departure from historic diplomatic process. And I'm curious what the members of the panel, how the members of the panel believe those dynamics will play out on the international stage.
Well, just briefly, I think that came to my mind when I saw President Trump, or actually even during the campaign, stated out his position. I thought that it would be using the lessons that he wrote in the book to get the maximum. Maximum bargaining chips means that you go for the end. You threaten to walk out. You threaten to break the deal, and then maybe come somewhere in the middle. I was hoping that there'll be some elements of that in the foreign policy of the U.S. But now it's still unclear as to how far that can work, and miscalculations. You talk about China, South China Sea. I think there is a degree of miscalculation that could be a danger to all of us. The Chinese will test, and the U.S. Trump will test. And so whether they can stop just before the road to nowhere is reached, or road with no return is reached, or not, depends. And the one China policy remains an interesting issue. Taiwan hasn't been given a fair deal. It's a democracy. But the fact was that Taiwan is no longer in the United Nations. China has put a lot of pressure on all countries in the world to respect one China policy. When I was foreign minister, the Taiwanese representative would always come up to me, stand next to me in pictures. Anyway, very sensitive. So if the Chinese is seen as weak when Trump is stepping on the one China policy, I think it's a dangerous situation, even though one may or may not agree with the one China principle, but it's there. It's been the foundation of the relations between China and the world.
Any other comments on alternate reality before we open to questions?
Yeah, I'll just make a quick comment. I mean, I think there's a fundamental difference between diplomacy and deal making. In business, at the end of the day, you can walk away. We can't walk away from Asia. We can't walk away from China. It's not U.S.-India that's going to be the most geopolitical relationship in this century. It's going to be the U.S.-China relationship.
Okay. Thank you. I will exert moderator's prerogative and simply note that at no time during the past 40 minutes did anyone say the words Japan or continental Europe. There was one mention of Latin America, but only by way of someone from Asia landing her plane in it. So I think we might want to meditate on the meaning of all of that as we go to questions from the audience. Sir, when you ask, there is a microphone coming toward you. Please identify yourself and then ask your question.
My name is Ken Silverman. I'm head of North America for a market entry firm that specializes in India and other parts of Asia. My question is for Ambassador Ashok. As you have listened to all of this and experienced the last year and the last month and the last week and so on, what is your perception as to how the India-China relationship will change as a result?
There will definitely be a spin-off, as was noted by some of the other panelists. What the U.S. does with China, it's being seen now increasingly as a triangular relationship. And so in this triangular relationship, if you change any of the parameters in one aspect, it changes all the other parameters. So we definitely will see if, depending on how the U.S.-China relationship plays out, it's definitely going to impact in a significant way U.S.-India relationships as well as India-China relationships. We have a very large trading relationship with China. This was ever since 1988 when Deng Xiaoping made the famous statement, let us seek common ground and preserve differences. So preserve differences means let's leave the border for the next generation. And seek common ground means let's trade. So ever since then, from something like 70 million trade, we went to today well over 70 billion. And in fact, it's larger than the trade with the United States in commodity terms, goods trades. The reason the US trade with India is the largest is because we have services trade, IT trade, which adds a huge chunk, and well over 100 billion is the trade with the US. So so the other situation is that we are still trying to move. We have regular discussions on the border boundary issue, and we continue to have problems on the border. So we'll have to see how China would use two aspects. One is, of course, their direct relationship with us in trying to see how far we go with the US in seeing how they should react with us, and also how far this US-India relationship plays out in trying to see how close they should get with what we call the necklace around us. Because this is something which the Chinese have engaged in for the last 30 years in building a necklace around India, Hambantota Port in Sri Lanka, Gwadar in Pakistan, Coco Islands in Myanmar, and across, to see a situation where they can preserve a strategic presence in the Indian Ocean. So we are naturally extremely concerned about the India-China relationship in this triangle. But we also feel that stronger India-US relations are in the interests of not only India's strength, but also in trying to keep this triangle in position.
Thank you. Back there, please.
Gunjan Bagla with Amrit, and I have a question for you, Robert. I've resolved this year to speak in only 140 characters at a time. So, border tax goes 30%.
You've just gone over.
Alternate facts. The 55 million people who voted for Trump are now paying 30% more at Walmart. Okay. America exerts military muscle in the Pacific. China stops buying US treasuries. Interest rates go up. How will President Trump deal with something like that?
Well, if that supposes that the Chinese decide to engage in unfair trade practices, that they intend to provoke the United States in international waters, I personally don't think it's going to happen. I think the Chinese have had a very good run, an extremely good run over the last 16 years, and especially over the last 8 years. It's been like a fire sale. And I think they understand that the United States Navy is still a force to be reckoned with. They understand that we have strong allies in Japan with Prime Minister Abe, with Prime Minister Modi in India. Japan and India and Australia are not minor countries. Singapore, the United States has a very well-formed alliance program. I spoke with a senior Malaysian official recently, and Malaysia is working on getting the five-power treaty back in business with the UK, New Zealand, Australia, Singapore, and Malaysia to give them leverage in the region. So, look, I don't think that the Chinese should want to test the Trump administration. I think what the Chinese should do is realize that they've had a tremendous run, that they're doing very well, that they like selling rubber fishing poles at Walmart, and that if people stop buying those fishing poles because they're 30% higher, that really hurts. That means Grandpa doesn't get a new fishing pole this year, but he can still fish with last year's fishing pole. But that really hurts the factory in China that's making the fishing pole. And if the PRC, if the Communist Party can't keep moving people into the middle class, it's going to have a problem. And so I think my guess is that the Chinese are going to look at this situation very carefully with realpolitik. These are very smart people. They're very tough negotiators. I've negotiated with them. I think they're going to look at this situation in a hard-headed fashion, and they're going to work to get along with the Trump administration. And I think just some of the nonsense and the bullying, I do think that is going to end. So I don't actually expect to have any sort of major confrontation with the Chinese. I think the Chinese are too smart to provoke something like that from happening. So I think, I'm optimistic about the future of the United States, and I'm optimistic about our continued role in Asia, and actually I'm optimistic about the future dealings with Japan, with China, where it's done on a basis of fairness and friendship, and not on the basis of cyber theft and bullying and in the past currency manipulation, although that may not be the case now. So I think the Chinese are smart enough to take what they've gotten over the past few years, and I don't expect to see an air defense identification zone in the South China Sea. I don't expect to see U.S. ships harassed. I think the Chinese are going to play this pretty smart.
The young lady in the middle, and then the young lady in the back, please.
Hi. First of all, I'd like to thank all the panelists today. I'm very interested. Specifically, this question I thought of when you were making your introductory remarks, Mr. O'Brien, but I'm also interested in what the other panelists think. Mao Zedong famously said that power comes from the barrel of a gun. My question is, with a projected move towards hard power and intimidation, how do you differentiate between leadership and bullying or leadership and an increase in imperialism? And if it's based on or predicated on the idea of moral authority, do you think that President Trump is qualified to represent American moral authority?
Well, I'll give you a really quick answer because my last answers haven't been quick. And my wife always gives me a hard time when I'm on Fox or something and says, you've got to speak in sound bites. You go on for too long, that can't answer enough questions. Yes, Donald Trump is going to lead. He's the President of the United States, and he was elected the President of the United States, and he's a legitimate president, and he's going to have the moral authority of the United States behind him when he acts. Number two, when we're in international waters, it's the United States Navy that for the past 70-some years has guaranteed freedom of transportation across the oceans, which has allowed millions and millions of people to come out of poverty, not just in China, but all over the world. And that's been something that the United States, people ought to be grateful for that. And I think for the most part, people are grateful because the United States Navy has kept the global commons open. And so when we're acting in the global commons in international waters to prevent other countries from taking what belongs to all of humanity, I think we have moral authority there. And I don't think it's intimidation when we're exercising our rights in international waters and other states, whether it's the PRC or Iran, attempt to impede shipping, whether it's naval shipping or merchant shipping in international waters. If we lose that freedom of the commons, all of us are going to suffer. And the vast gains in wealth across the world since the end of World War II will start to diminish very quickly. The global commons are critical. We play an important role in that. Any country that wants to disrupt the global commons for their own use, that's improper, it's wrong, and the entire world should be against it, not just the United States or the West.
Other views on the panel?
I'll just make a quick comment. Hard power matters, soft power matters. And the U.S. has had an enormous advantage over China in soft power. A lot of that soft power happens to come from Los Angeles.
Yes.
And what concerns me is, when Trump raises the one China policy, I think before he did that, half of the Chinese people, or more than half, were willing to give him a chance. Chinese kind of like Republicans, kind of rhymes with Nixon and Kissinger. And as soon as he raised the one China policy, I think he lost most of the Chinese people, and that constrains what Chinese leaders can do.
Well, let me give you a different angle to that. Today, I think, was a rather happy day for China and Trump. Maybe not for reasons that President Trump has been thinking of, but by pulling out of the TPP, that has done a lot of good for China. China has been seeing the TPP as an instrument to exclude it from trade. And now it's green light for China to pursue what it has started to pursue. In fact, I sense a happiness when I was in Beijing, and that is called it's actually an ASEAN-initiated Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, for short RCEP or RCEP. That excludes the U.S., and China is in, a lot of other countries are in, and China explicitly, with a smile, when we talked about Trump, the Chinese says, RCEP will come to an agreement, will be signed by the end of this year. So they're very pleased about that. So actually Trump has already pleased the Chinese. So it's going to be a mixed package. But again, I still feel that the Chinese will not refrain from testing to a degree. No one wants an open conflict. But there is that danger of miscalculation, especially if one still uses Twitter diplomacy. If it's diplomacy in which all elements of the issues are thought through, I think I would feel more comfortable. But Twitter makes me a bit nervous.
Can I just very quickly and respectfully disagree. I think TPP, the loss of TPP is bad for Thailand and it's bad for China. First of all, TPP signified the U.S.'s commitment to Asia. And however imperfect that was, that led to 65 years of relative peace and prosperity that allowed Asia to grow and become prosperous. Also, TPP set a standard. RCEP is not going to set a standard. And many of the Chinese reformers that I talked to said, like TPP, because it gave them a standard to aim for and maybe one day emulate. And you are just not going to have it. It ultimately hurts the reformers in China that want to open up.
Okay, I guess I need to have a quick response to that. I think that would have been absolutely correct if the Chinese had been part of the 12 in the TPP. The feeling in at least the leadership, now the people might feel a bit differently, but in the leadership was that TPP was designed to exclude China, and therefore it's no good. It might be good for the 12, might be good for the Asia-Pacific region, but China is not a part of it, and China would not be able to press ahead with RCEP to compete with the TPP. That's one point. The second point is that Thailand would have agreed too that TPP is good, except the reason why I said it's not Thailand welcomes the demise of the TPP was because unfortunately we were undecisive. When we were invited to join the TPP, we couldn't decide, and then it became too late. And we wanted to join the TPP, but when the doors were closed, we felt that, okay, we're outside, so if the TPP comes into force, then we would lose out. Vietnam would gain, other countries would gain in the 12, but we would lose. And that's why without the TPP, it sets Thailand on equal footings. And now we are part of the negotiations for the RCEP. So that's why.
Now, we've been given the signal that there's time for one more question, and we'd already identified the young lady in the back. Is there a microphone nearby?
Hi. My question actually arose when Mr. O'Brien was speaking about China's long run in creating wealth with product and going back to the idea of Americans buying their product from China and going into Walmart and getting a $5 fishing pole. I think there's a lack of appreciation for the fact that America is a consumerist culture, and we might not want everyone to go buy products from Walmart and made in China, but the truth is that they do. It's consistently one of the top Fortune 500 companies. So for me, as someone who owned a small business that created product, as much as I tried to find getting product made in America or made in other countries that had a very high level of social awareness for their workers, the truth is that China came back to me every single time as having the most equipment, having the most labor. They turn things around quickly, and I can see why American businesses rely on that because the consumerist culture here depends on that. So I guess my question for all of you is, what are the opportunities that can be created in other Asian countries or even in America to kind of compete with China? Because as much as we say we have to put them in their place, they're competing on a very high level.
Dave or Ambassador, do you have an answer for this one?
I would just step in to say
Invest
that
in India.
there is competition to China. We are competing with them. We are already better than them in IT. And manufacturing is one area where we have suffered because China, about 45% of GDP is manufacturing, and we have about 16 to 17%. But this is why the thrust of my Prime Minister over the last 2 years has been to do Make in India, Digital India, and all these measures, which is, and also improve ease of doing business, because the idea is to promote manufacturing in a very big way. And a lot of it need not be the kind of manufacturing China has been doing, because China basically started off manufacturing not for the Chinese, but for the world. We manufacture for Indians, but when we do it for Indians, we will also do it for the world. So I do see us as offering a competition to China.
Now, Jonathan, there's been lobbying for more questions. You're in control of the timetable, so it's your call.
I think we need to, I mean, there are a lot more questions. I could ask plenty myself, but I think we should move on to the next panel. And of course, everyone can talk afterwards.
John, can
just
I
one-
just, oh, I was
No,
going to say.
Excellency. Yeah, regarding competing with China, I wanted to also maybe send a message to the Trump administration that the U.S. has friends in Southeast Asia. The Association of Asian Nations, ASEAN, has actually approaching 700 million in population. And don't forget Southeast Asian countries, because if the U.S. forgets Southeast Asian countries, or at least make them feel that way, they would go towards China. And so it's very important for the U.S. to enhance the friendship with ASEAN, enhance bilateral friendships with all the Southeast Asian countries. That's another way to balance with China.
Dave,
Can I make
final word?
just one quick question, playing off David, but also complimenting Ambassador Huebner about soft power and how important that is. We've had a wonderful relationship with New Zealand for many years, but for almost 40 years, we have not been able to send a warship to New Zealand because of some political differences over nuclear propulsion and that sort of thing. When Ambassador Huebner was the ambassador to New Zealand, he worked tirelessly on that issue. Last year, we sent our first warship to New Zealand after, I think, over 3 decades. It arrived just at the time that there was an earthquake, a natural disaster, and it immediately provided what we call HADAR, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, to the people of New Zealand, along with some other naval vessels that were there from Canada and Australia, and then returned to Auckland Harbor, in heroic fashion. Not because it had just gone and won a war, but because it had helped people that had suffered in a devastating earthquake. That wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for Ambassador Huebner's work in New Zealand, laying the ground for our DDG to go visit New Zealand. So soft power makes a huge difference, and that was one example. And it's an unhappy coincidence that there was an earthquake, but a happy coincidence for the U.S. Navy that it was able to go there and render humanitarian assistance to the people of New Zealand. And the goodwill that comes from those sorts of efforts is just tremendous for the United States. And so I just want to compliment you, David.
Well, thank you.
I
think it always appropriate for a panel to an end with a compliment to the moderator. So with that, I'd like to thank all 4 of our panelists for a very interesting discussion. Thank you. Thank you.